So we often talk about black swan events, and boy, do we have a black swan event that's looming. Um, I think there's still a little bit of space for a little bit more dumping, unfortunately, and I'll tell you why in a minute. So, what's happening at the moment? Apart from the things that we've been talking about that have created the minor sort of FUD, the whale games, and everything, we now have a new factor. This one is a global event. It's a macro event rather. And as you all probably know, what's happening in the Middle East, this is the first time that this unprecedented action has occurred on each of their, so you want to call this, I don't want to say the words because I don't want to get blacklisted by YouTube, because that's what they do when these events happen, but you know what I mean. So you have these two entities that have now entered into direct conflict with each other. They've been in conflict with each other for decades now, but this is the first time that we've had a direct interaction from each other's sovereign land, if you know what I mean. Prior to this, they'd operated, in proxy, which means there are new rules of engagement, the gloves are off, and depending on what the tit for tat retaliation is, that might then decide who then gets involved. I know the Brits are now involved, the Americans have always been involved. Who knows, NATO, yada, yada, yada. We're waiting for Vladimir Putin's response. I've already said too many names, so this video is already probably, shadow banned, but who cares? In terms of Bitcoin, I think that what's happened is we've seen a shock dump from Wall Street and institutions because they're running away from risky assets, because at these times people look for things like gold and things that they perceive in the traditional investment world as safe havens, right? Government bonds, etc., right? So people are fleeing to safety. But what's going to happen, I think, as the fleeing to safety gets on the way and the dust settles and we have more information about what's happening, just like what happened with Ukraine in the early days of the special operation, there was a lot of uncertainty and we saw massive dumps all over the place. And when the dust settled, then Bitcoin just made its way back up again when people realized, oh, right, so now this is happening. We have all this information, and Bitcoin is still amazing. And actually, Bitcoin is a better safe haven in this kind of situation than gold. So the response that we're getting now is from people who have a set way of responding, and they've done that for centuries. So they just it's muscle memory, right? Dump the Bitcoin, dump the tech stocks, dump the high risk equities, right? And since we're perceived as high risk equities at the moment, crypto, we're in that bucket. That's what happens, right? So I think, in my opinion, the market has actually done a lot better than I expected. I know a lot of people think this is a bloodbath, but I've seen bloodbaths that are much worse than this happen based on situations that weren't as dire, right? We know that now they're going to have to spend even more trillions, probably just printed out of thin air to pay for whatever is coming. So we're going to see more money being injected into the system. Inflation is going to skyrocket again. We could basically forget about rate cuts now for the next maybe 10 years, the way things are going. So people are going to flee to Bitcoin. And when they do that and Bitcoin recovers in a massive way, then we're going to see, other altcoins and stuff also recover. Solana has particularly suffered this time because Solana's pump has been somewhat artificial up until now, because it wasn't Solana's own fundamentals in and of itself that made it pump, but rather by proxy. The fact that there were so many memes that were pumping on Solana. Now, a lot of these memes have been wiped out, man. Some of them have been rug pulled. Some of them are still sort of like holding their own, obviously, and some of them will come back big time. So I expect Solana also to make a massive recovery when Bitcoin does. But in terms of greed and fear index, we're now at 61, which is relatively low. And I said before in my previous video that we might see it go to neutral if something like this were to happen, and something like this has just happened. So right now we're bang on the border between neutral and greed. So one more step and we'll be in neutral. I think the coming week is going to be really interesting. We have on the positive end the halving, which itself might be sort of negative first before positive, i.e., people might dump as anticlimax sets in, and people are like, "Oh, it's halving, nothing happened," not realizing that the halving, is for the next 4 years effectively, and then dump, right? And then we're gonna have whatever happens in the Middle East going forward, whatever response, retaliation we see, whoever talks and says they're gonna hit back, blah blah blah. That's going to affect the market big time. So we've got a yin and yang situation this week. Is going to be really, really volatile. Best thing to do, in my opinion, no financial advice, if you're already in, is to hodl, sit back, make sure you don't have any complete garbage coins. If you do, they're probably gone to quite low now anyway, probably no point selling. Again, no financial advice, whatever you want. XRP, man, it took a hit just like everybody else, but I think being a solid coin is going to make a big comeback with Bitcoin when the dust settles. I will see you in the next video. Do your own research, no financial advice. Peace.